The Ukrainian people hate the Russian people with good reason. The fact is, the president is shaking hands with Putin. So the question is, what are you willing to give? At a certain point, it's just a Pyrrhic victory. Like,
Yes.
what's the point of being Ukrainian on a pile of ashes?
So Michael Malice recently went on the Winston Marshall show to explain how the war in Ukraine will end. He also gets into what he thinks is at the heart of this conflict and what the timeline is to the culmination of this war. He's probably the most prominent anarchist in the world, so let's get his viewpoint on this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
One of the things you can't dispute is that when the Cold War ended, Soviet Union becoming Russia again became a lot less important. Like, for decades, the big foreign policy question everywhere was U.S. versus USSR. That was the world. Everything was viewed in that vein, right? First, people don't realize when they talk about third world countries, the second world was the Soviet Union and the Soviet satellites. It was the first world, the West, Russia and the satellites, and then third world is everyone else that are poorer. So they have this sense that the fact is the president is shaking hands with Putin. He is kind of, doing in many ways, accommodating Putin. So this gives them a sense of pride and a sense of strength. And you can understand that to some extent.
Do you think that Trump made the right move in doing that in his greeting in Alaska? You're referring to the Alaska meeting.
I mean, even before that, he would speak he would make sure not to criticize Putin. I think my only goal is, here's the thing, there's going to be a compromise. There's going to be appeasement, because I have not heard a single person, even who's the most diehard Ukraine apologist or a defender, I don't want to say apologist, say we're going to go to Moscow and take out Putin. Putin's getting away with it. Like, he's not getting taken out. So the question is, what are you willing to give? I had Konstantin on my show debating Dave Smith about this issue. And I asked Konstantin, I go, is it your view that if Putin takes over Ukraine, he's going to engage in some kind of genocide or ethnic cleansing? And he's like, no. I go, okay, then at that point you have to compromise. Because unless we're talking about, he's going to invade, just slaughtering people on a mass scale and have some kind of, insane war like genocide, then it's just like, okay, some people are going to be unhappy. There's no scenario where some people aren't going to be unhappy.
Yeah, that's just the truth. After $200 billion was spilled into Ukraine from the United States, EU countries have flowed a lot of money into it too. It's hard to disagree with that part of this. The point in which I will disagree with Malice to some extent, though, is where he says that Trump has been careful not to insult Putin, and that is just flat wrong. Even through this presidency, he's often said, stop being an idiot, and said, outright falsities about Putin. The fact that, he brought up the fact that, hey, he just wants to conquer all of Ukraine. He wants all that territory. There's no reason to suggest that. There's no reason to believe that based upon the troop levels and commitment to resources that Putin would have to do to get to that. He has been bellicose toward Putin, and not just this term. In this first term, he criticized Putin for giving Snowden asylum. He withdrew from the INF on behalf of the warfare state because the INF treaty, prohibited a certain class of ballistic missiles. He pulled out of it, hurling bellicose verbiage toward Putin, and slapped sanctions on Russia for taking Crimea, which represented its own interests in joining Russia through a plebiscite by a margin of 97%. So that part I'll disagree with, but ultimately there probably will be an agreement if Zelensky's willing to accept it, or if Trump is willing to just disengage and Zelensky's hand will be forced.
At a certain point, because I saw recent polls and I was glad to see this, I thought the Ukrainian people hate the Russian people with good reason. You know what I mean? Like, this goes way back. People can find out about this on themselves. It's not complicated. But the recent polls had a huge...
Going back to the Holodomor.
Way before that, even before that.
Huh.
A big percentage of the Ukrainian people now want the war to end. Because I thought they're like, we're going to fight this till the last man. And I'm like, at a certain point, it's just a Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah, that's the case. Polling suggests that it's something like 70% of Ukrainians actually want some negotiated settlement now. And there were mass protests in the streets just 2 weeks ago or so, showing big demonstrations against Zelensky, really for the first time. And Zelensky's done everything he can with the iron hand of government to impose, martial law and restrictions on political dissent, banning of oppositional political parties, etc. But the tides are shifting even in Ukraine too. Everyone knows it.
Yes. Like, what's the point of you being Ukrainian on a pile of ashes? So I'm hopeful. What I thought would be a good move on Putin's part, because the thing is, everyone has to be able to save face. Everyone has to say that they won, right? That's tricky. If Putin says, I will give back every land except for like the Donbass and Crimea, which he's had for a minute now, you get all the rest. In exchange, the U.S. leaves NATO. Great. The U.S. can still partner with NATO at any opportunity. You don't need to formally be a member to work together. The phone calls work, emails work. Ukraine gets peace and no more people being killed. Putin retreats. That, I think, would be an attractive package.
Yeah, I think that'd be an amazing package for all parties, including the United States. But the big problem is that, well, the warmongers and the military-industrial complex within the United States aren't going to go for it. Any departure from NATO or defunding of NATO, withdraw from NATO, is just completely off the table. I hate to say it because that's the best idea if you're a non-interventionist dissident like me, an anti-war activist. You would want the U.S. to get out of the most dangerous entangling alliance, which is NATO. So I commend Malice for this viewpoint. I think he's exactly right. This would be a win for all parties to some extent. But when one of the parties is infected by the world's most deadly military-industrial complex, I don't think it's going to happen. I also am less hopeful than he is that a negotiated settlement will take place anytime soon.
U.S. leaves NATO, not Ukraine, not to join NATO.
Well, that's a given that the Ukraine's not joining NATO.
Right. Okay. Right. Do you think is that actually? I've never heard that. Is that actually on the cards? Is that?
I heard George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's ex-husband or husband. I remember he's got full-blown TDS, saying, "Watch, Trump's going to say that the U.S. is leaving NATO tonight," and I'm like, that wouldn't actually be a bad bargaining chip for Putin to play, and Trump would bite, I think.
I don't think he would, although that would make my dreams. But I think that's way too optimistic of a view. Trump has boasted recently about saving NATO when it came to the fact that he reduced U.S. contributions to NATO and bragged on Truth Social that means he saved NATO. Although in the past, in his first term and in the run-up to his first term, he did talk about how NATO was a remnant of the Cold War. It didn't belong in the world anymore, and he was totally right then, but he's abandoned that vernacular and that line of reasoning completely.
It would a huge backlash in America, wouldn't it?
No.
No, I guess the MAGA base would be support because they're more isolationist.
There wouldn't be a backlash at all. There would be, but not a big one.
Oh, I think there would be from the deep state and the warmongers and the neocon influence that still pervades this administration, not from Americans at large, for sure. So maybe another little disagreement between us here.
Because the point is, if you're not formally in NATO, that doesn't mean I'm never going to work with the NATO countries.
Right.
The UK is not part of the EU. You still work with them.
Yes, quite. That's the sort of fallacy of these sort of groups. This is the same thing we had when we were debating whether or not to stay in the EU. It's like whether or not, or people were saying World War III was going to start, as if the EU would actually in any way resist that. Like it's silly. Of course we can have alliances with people. Yeah.
All right, so a lot of interesting things said here. I'm glad that Malice is more hopeful than I am about a negotiated settlement to this war coming soon. I mean, that is a big step. I have to admit, Trump opening up discussions with Putin is a much different approach to Biden's closed-door policy, Sullivan's closed-door policy, and Blinken's closed-door policy, right? But tangibly, the policy hasn't changed that much in terms of what we're actually doing, still aiding Ukraine outside of that 6 days or so at the end of February into March, where Trump stopped support going to Zelensky. He restored it under a stupid ceasefire idea and mineral deal over minerals that were under Russian occupation anyways. But one of the things that Malice brought up here that I think is so interesting is the idea of U.S. leaving NATO. I do think that that would sway Zelensky to giving up far more than he would under any other circumstance. I just don't think it's going to happen in the United States because of all the lobbies, all the deeply entrenched interests in the bureaucracy, and just the eternal desire amongst the war party to get into these entangling alliances. They encourage, warfare, regime change operations, and military strikes that are, I hate to say, lucrative for the Lockheed Martins and Boeings and Raytheons of the world. So when Malice says, that's a legitimate idea, I would love to believe that. I would, eat crow if I'm wrong about this. I think that'd be a great settlement idea that would benefit all parties. They could all claim that they're winning. I just think it's as utopian as saying, hey, we can just close down the IRS and, the American people won't have backlash against it because, let's face it, the American people don't like income taxes in general. Who's defending income taxes? Very few people. It's a small niche of statists that want to do that. But at the same time, there's deeply entrenched interests in Washington, in the annals and halls of power, that need to keep the extortion apparatus behind which the IRS thrives in existence. Otherwise, they can't extract wealth from us. Same goes for the Federal Reserve and other tactics that they use to finance the empire. But that is a plausible idea if we were a legitimate government that had virtuous people in it. To the extent that that's even possible anymore, it's hard to say so. But that's where we're at. So ultimately, Malice is mostly right here. Putin is going to get the Donbass region, barring a crazy idea like the U.S., leaving NATO. Not crazy in my estimation, but for the war party's estimation. He's going to get Crimea. He's going to get the Donbass, the 4 oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. And he has to get a declared statement from the United States that Ukraine won't enter NATO. That's what this war has been about the entire time. Before 2014, the Yanukovych government, which was there from 2010 on, was a government that just wanted neutrality, not, strictly close relations with Russia, but neutrality. But neutrality is what the deep state hated most. So the United States helped overthrow that government in 2014. They called it the Revolution of Dignity, but it was really the Maidan coup of stupidity and duplicity. That's what it was. That is at the crux of this war. And it led up to that point after several decades. So I hope there's a negotiated settlement, but I don't think it's going to happen if you don't take the steps that we've always known from the Russian viewpoint that are needed. And the U.S. just should disengage. That would be the best case scenario for the United States. Trump doesn't have to negotiate anything, but he can end this war. He's just afraid that if he does that, he'd get too much backlash. He's giving up Ukraine. It'd be like Truman losing China, right? That was the notion that Truman, had to do with communist victory over the nationalists in 1949. So that's where we're at. Loved Michael Malice's viewpoint here. I appreciate it. Let me know down below, is Michael Malice right? Will there be a negotiated settlement soon, or will there not be one with Trump and Rubio talking security guarantees now? Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also consider becoming a YouTube member. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel, and in return, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.